She sang beyond her years as far as interpreting certain lyrics, like Rainy Days and Mondays. She sang it as if she had experienced those feelings, and she was 20 years old.
For more than 40 years, Richard Carpenter has been the keeper of one of the most complicated stories in music history. He watched his sister become one of the greatest voices America ever produced, and watched the same industry that made them famous fail her completely. He sat in rooms while doctors missed what was right in front of them, made decisions that haunted him for decades, and stayed quiet about most of it. But at 78 years old, Richard Carpenter has started confirming the things that fans and journalists and biographers have been circling for years. What did he reveal? Join us as we uncover what rumors Richard confirmed about his sister. The family that built Karen's cage before she could sing a note. Before the fame, there was a family dynamic in the Carpenter household that set the conditions for everything that followed. Richard Carpenter has confirmed in interviews over the years that the family dynamics were real and more damaging than the official version of the Carpenter story ever acknowledged. Agnes Carpenter, the siblings' mother, made no secret of the fact that Richard was her priority. The family moved from New Haven, Connecticut, to Downey, California, in 1963, primarily to support Richard's music career. Agnes had identified Richard as a piano prodigy from an early age and organized the household around developing his talent. Karen was 4 years younger and received a fundamentally different level of parental investment. Agnes showed an open and consistent favoritism toward Richard that Karen spent her entire life trying to overcome. Karen's first interest was not even singing. She was a drummer, and a genuinely exceptional one who could play complicated jazz time signatures within a year of picking up sticks, and went on to study with jazz drummer Bill Douglas, who had worked with Benny Goodman and Art Tatum. She was also outgoing, athletic, and well-liked. None of that was enough to close the gap that Agnes had created. The attention that Karen received at home was the attention that happened to be left over after Richard's needs were met. And Karen grew up understanding that about her own family. Richard has not denied that the family dynamic was real. What he has confirmed, especially in interviews tied to biographies and documentaries about Karen, is that the pressure Karen operated under came from multiple directions simultaneously. The label pressure, the touring pressure, and the family pressure. All three of them were pointing at her from angles that left no room to simply be a person who was struggling. Biographer Randy Schmidt, whose 2010 book Little Girl Blue became the most thorough account of Karen's life and was based on interviews with people inside the Carpenter circle, documented in detail how Agnes refused to acknowledge the severity of Karen's health decline and refused to allow the family to be portrayed as anything less than wholesome and happy. When a CBS documentary about Karen's life was being produced, Agnes had content removed that showed how Karen had been deprived of maternal affection. The image had to be protected even after Karen was gone. Richard has confirmed that the family did not know how to help Karen. He has confirmed that they did not respond to the warning signs in time, and that the dynamic between Karen and their mother was real and consequential. What he has been slower to do is name the weight of what was created before Karen was ever famous enough to be broken by it. If the family conditions were this damaging before fame even arrived, what happened to Karen Carpenter when the music industry got hold of her and the pressure multiplied 100-fold overnight? The overnight success that became a slow emergency. The Carpenters were not a gradual build. It was a sudden explosion, and Richard has confirmed multiple times that the speed of it was one of the most destabilizing things that happened to both of them. Karen was 19, and Richard was 23 when they signed with A&M Records in 1969. Their first album went nowhere. Their second included Close to You, Richard's fresh arrangement of a song that Dionne Warwick and Dusty Springfield had already recorded. With Karen's voice on it, the song went to #1. Within about a year of signing their contract, the Carpenters were headlining Las Vegas. Richard has said that looking back at their schedules from those early years, especially the one-nighters, they simply did not need to be doing them. They had no manager protecting them from the industry's appetite for their time and talent. A&M Records had a machine, and the Carpenters were put inside it, and nobody in their family or circle had the experience or the leverage to slow it down. Richard revealed in interviews that he regrets the 6- and 7-day work weeks of that period, and that had he known then what he knows now, he would not have agreed to that schedule. He was persuaded by the belief that without constant touring, the Carpenters would not be financially stable, which was a fear manufactured by the industry and accepted by a family that had no frame of reference for how success at that scale actually worked. The irony is devastating. The Carpenters had more than 100 million records sold worldwide. They had 3 Grammy Awards. They were arguably the most commercially successful duo of the entire 1970s, and the people around them were telling them they could not afford to rest. Karen handled the pressure by throwing herself into the work whenever anything was difficult. That pattern is well known by everyone who knew her professionally. When something was wrong in her personal life, she performed better. She showed up on time, she hit every note, and she kept the machine running, while privately she was falling apart. Richard, meanwhile, was developing his own crisis. By the late 1970s, he had become addicted to Quaaludes, which he had initially been taking as a prescribed sleep aid. His tolerance escalated until he was essentially sedated on stage and could barely function. In January 1979, he fell down a flight of stairs backstage in a semi-comatose state and finally confronted the reality of what was happening to him. He checked into a 6-week treatment program at the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas, and spent the rest of 1979 in recovery, meaning the Carpenters essentially stopped operating for a year while Richard dealt with his dependency. Richard confirmed that his mother, Agnes, gave him his first Quaalude, having been prescribed them herself and considering them no more serious than sleeping pills. That detail has appeared in biographies and documentary reviews, and Richard has not disputed it. The same woman who would later fight to control the narrative of Karen's illness had, according to this account, handed her son his first addictive sedative. So when Richard went to rehab and the Carpenters went on hold in 1979, what did Karen do with the first real creative freedom she had ever been given? The solo album that could have saved her and the people who killed it. What happened to Karen Carpenter's solo album is one of the most discussed and most painful episodes in the history of the music industry. Richard has confirmed details about it over the years, and what those details reveal about how Karen was treated by the people who controlled her career is genuinely enraging. When Richard went to rehab in 1979 and the Carpenters went into suspension, Karen, for the first time in a decade, had a window of creative space that belonged entirely to her. She went to New York and hired legendary producer Phil Ramone, who had worked with Billy Joel and Paul Simon and was at the peak of his career. She invested $400,000 of her own money into the project, plus $100,000 fronted by A&M Records. She worked with Billy Joel's backing band, with session musicians including Steve Gadd and Greg Phillinganes, and she recorded 21 songs. The album blended disco, soft pop, jazz, and country. It was a complete departure from the Carpenters' sound, and it was genuinely adventurous. Producer Phil Ramone has said that Karen was excited and proud of what they had made. She flew back to California to play it for her family, and returned to New York visibly in worse physical condition than when she had left. Multiple people who were close to the project revealed that Agnes did not approve of the album. The music was considered too suggestive, too mature, too far from the clean image that Agnes had protected for over a decade. Ramon has stated that he believed Agnes's reaction at that playback was one of the most damaging moments of Karen's adult life. A&M Records co-founder Herb Alpert called the album unreleasable and had it shelved. Quincy Jones, who was at the peak of his own creative powers at the time, championed the album and tried to convince A&M Vice President Derek Green to release it. Alpert, Moss, and Green refused. The album that Karen had funded herself, which she had made during the first genuine creative freedom of her career, was locked in a vault. It would not be released until 1996, 13 years after she died. Richard confirmed that he did not advocate for the album's release at the time. His stated position has been that he felt Karen was not well enough to have been working on it and that A&M's concerns about the commercial direction were valid. Musicians and collaborators who worked on the sessions have consistently said the opposite. They have said Karen very much wanted the album released and that the decision to shelve it was not hers. On February 3, 1983, the day before Karen died, she called Phil Ramone. She told him she still loved the album they had made. She was devastated that it had never come out. Less than 24 hours later, she was dead at 32 years old. Richard released the album in its original intended form in 1996, 14 years after it was completed and 3 years after the tribute album. If I Were a Carpenter had reignited public interest in the Carpenter's catalog. He has never fully explained why it took that long, or what changed his mind. If the shelving of the solo album broke something in Karen that never fully healed, what happened next when she was pushed into the worst personal relationship of her life by the same people who were supposed to protect her? The marriage nobody should have let happen. The story of Karen Carpenter's marriage to Thomas Burris is one of the most disturbing episodes in the full account of her life, and Richard Carpenter has confirmed over the years that it was a catastrophe that compounded everything else that was already destroying her. Karen met Burris in 1980 on a blind date. She was 30 years old and had spent her entire adult life on the road and in recording studios with no space to build a personal life. She had spoken in interviews about wanting to be married and have children. Burris was 39, a real estate developer, and divorced with an adult son. They became engaged after 2 months of dating. Just days before their wedding rehearsal dinner, Burris told Karen that he had undergone a vasectomy and could not father children. The man who had been aware throughout their entire courtship that starting a family was the thing Karen wanted most had withheld this information until canceling the wedding would have been a social and financial disaster. Karen called her mother immediately and said she wanted to call off the wedding. Agnes told her no. Agnes had spent a fortune on the preparations and sent out all the invitations and told her daughter that she had made her bed and would have to lie in it. The wedding went ahead on August 31st, 1980, at the Crystal Room of the Beverly Hills Hotel. What followed was 14 months that close friends would later describe as the worst thing that could have happened to Karen Carpenter. Burris was living far beyond his means and began taking money from Karen in amounts of $35,000 and $50,000 at a time. He drove expensive cars that he could not afford. He was cruel to her verbally, reportedly calling her a bag of bones and telling her that no man would want to have children with her. The man who had destroyed her dream of motherhood was now using that destruction as a weapon against her daily. Karen filed for divorce in October 1982 while hospitalized at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York. She died before the divorce was finalized, which meant the marriage was still legally in place when she was buried. Burris attended her funeral and placed his wedding ring into her casket. Karen left everything to her family. Burris received nothing from her estate. She reportedly had only a few $1,000s left in her bank account by the time she died, despite having been one of the most commercially successful artists in the world. Richard confirmed years later that the marriage was a disaster and that the people around Karen had concerns about Burris from very early in the relationship. What he has been less direct about is the role that Agnes played in forcing Karen into a marriage she explicitly tried to escape 3 days before it happened. If Agnes Carpenter was willing to force her daughter into a marriage that Karen herself recognized as a betrayal, what was really happening inside that family when the public cameras were not on them? Richard's final confirmation. Richard Carpenter, who is now 78 years old, has done something that the younger version of him could not bring himself to do. He has confirmed, in interviews attached to documentaries and in public statements about Karen's legacy, that the official narrative of how Karen Carpenter died was incomplete, and that the people and institutions closest to her bear more responsibility for her decline than has ever been fully acknowledged. He has confirmed that the medical establishment failed Karen. The psychotherapist who treated her in 1982, Stephen Levenkron, is someone Richard has said did nothing to help her. Karen entered treatment with a specialist in eating disorders, spent months in his care, and came out without the underlying psychological work having been done. The feeding tube that was supposed to nourish her during hospitalization at Lenox Hill accidentally punctured one of her lungs. The treatment that was supposed to save her added to the physical damage she was already carrying. Richard still gets visibly upset about it when discussing it in interviews. He has also confirmed the broader failure of the music industry to protect artists who were visibly deteriorating. Fans in concert audiences were gasping at how thin Karen looked during live performances in the late 1970s. Audience members were writing to the Carpenters asking what was wrong. Richard has said that with what he knows now, he would never have agreed to the schedules they were keeping. He regrets those years of 6- and 7-day weeks, and nobody in the business was looking out for either of them as human beings. The most significant confirmation Richard has made is about the gap between who Karen Carpenter was publicly and who she was privately. The Carpenters existed in the public imagination as the cleanest, most wholesome act in pop music. They performed at the Nixon White House. They were the opposite of everything that rock and roll represented. Behind that image was a woman who was desperately lonely, who had been emotionally deprived by her mother since childhood, who had been denied her one real act of creative independence, who had been pushed into a predatory marriage she tried to escape, who received inadequate medical treatment, and who died at 32 in the bedroom of her childhood home while her body gave out from a decade of punishment that everyone around her could see and nobody fully stopped. Karen's death in February 1983 changed how the entire world understood eating disorders. The condition was barely recognized outside of clinical settings before her death. Her autopsy attributed the cause to emetine cardiotoxicity as a consequence of anorexia nervosa. The coverage that followed brought widespread public attention to a disease that had been invisible, and her family subsequently established the Karen A. Carpenter Memorial Foundation to fund research into eating disorders. That is the legacy Richard has dedicated himself to honoring and preserving. What Richard carries at 78 is the weight of being the person who was there for all of it. The person who benefited most from the family dynamic that damaged Karen. The person who went to rehab while Karen used the space to make the album nobody would release. The person had recovered and was working again, while Karen's marriage and her health collapsed simultaneously. The brother who outlived his sister by more than 40 years and has spent those years trying to make sense of a story that does not resolve neatly into anyone being entirely innocent or entirely responsible. He has confirmed the rumors, not because he had nothing to lose, but because at 78, With everything already decided, the only thing left to offer Karen Carpenter was the truth. The world deserved that. Does knowing the full story of what Richard Carpenter has confirmed change how you hear the Carpenters' music now? And do you think he should have spoken up about all of this decades earlier? Or was he right to wait until he was ready? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.